Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream number lambda upsilon 3.17719.
You're scaring the cat away.
I am scaring the cat away. It is the Q&A segment of the 2021 commemorative edition of DarkHorse. Welcome. That was a mess.
No, that's fine.
All right. Okay. Thank God I didn't do that live.
Our question from the Discord this week is as follows.
Okay.
What system would you recommend we use to replace the current academic peer review / publishing company gatekeeping system? What would be an improved way of discerning validity while allowing space for truly innovative ideas? It's a big question, and you can't just fix peer review and the publishing system without fixing the money problem in science more broadly. I don't think, and I would say, a couple of things that come to mind for me are publishing does require money, and one of the things that the granting agencies have is a lot of money, and so to some degree, a sort of PBS / NPR / state-funded universities model a little bit for some publications, science publications, might be a possibility. I'm not sure it would work. But otherwise, fixing part of the problem while not solving the problem of, well, how do you have the money in order to do the publishing doesn't quite get you there. There are two other things at different levels of solution. One is the idea of peer review isn't inherently broken. The way that it's instantiated is broken. And one of the problems is that the peers that are asked to review individual papers are all from the specialty of the original paper. And whereas in, for instance, in academic hiring, you generally have a larger committee, it's more than 3 people, but you usually have at least one person on the committee who is outside of the domain of the person who's being hired. And I would think that if it were possible, and it really should be possible, that just playing with numbers here, if in general papers have 3 peers that review a paper, having 2 of those peers for any given paper be outside of the immediate domain of the person writing the paper and the subject of the paper would keep such cabals from forming, so that you wouldn't have these like, I pat your back, you pat mine. Oh, I'm going to publish this piece of crap, and then I'm going to sign off when they send me your next piece of crap to sign off on. So that's one of the problems that happens in peer review, and that would be resolved somewhat. It would be harder for scientists to be routinely asked to review papers outside of their immediate domain, but frankly would make people better scientists and better thinkers and more likely to be a little bit more generalist in their capacity. And it might be that you would have sort of, someone within the domain and someone sort of within the sort of nested layers of domain specificity for reviewers. And then the other thing I'd say is that, PLOS, what does that stand for? The Public Library of Science, which started, I actually looked it up, it started in 2001. You can show my screen here, Zach. Seems to be making a go of it. Like, they seem to be doing a good job. And they have a little timeline here, which is interesting. I didn't remember that they had started back in 2001, but they've got a number of initiatives. So it's open source. I don't know, and I couldn't tell from a very brief look here, how it is that they are funding what they're doing, but they have a number of journals now that are entirely open access. And for those people who don't have university affiliation and who are looking to find the scientific literature, seeing that something's been published in PLOS is a godsend, because you just don't have to work any harder. You can go and you know that it's going to be openly available. But I don't know very much about what all their model is.
All right, 2 things. One, I have suggested the idea that reviewers should at least include people who are outside of the field. And the way I've suggested it is adjacent field. And the idea... My primary concern, yes, there's the reciprocity networks that evolve when people are too close together. But there's also just the simple fact that if you can't explain it to the people in the adjacent field, it isn't any good. I'm sorry, that's just simply true. I don't care how technical your field is. You need to be able to explain it to the people one field over at least.
Yeah.
Right? That's the shallow end of the pool of clarity and importance.
Totally.
But I also think there's something about the question that signs up for a broken rubric. And it's like, well, what are we going to do about the fact that the engine room is flooding? And it's like, well, yes, the ship is sinking. The engine room is flooding for sure. And we could talk about how to get the water out of the goddamn engine room, but
probably shouldn't focus on replastering the walls.
Yeah, the engine room might not be the primary consideration. The fact that the spine of the ship is about to crack and it's going to plunge to the bottom of the sea is more to the point. And so the point is, look, everything about peer review is broken, starting with the fact that we've now started miseducating people with a system of reciprocity that causes them not to be very good at understanding reality, and therefore they're not very good at reviewing papers even when they aren't corrupt.
Right.
So the whole thing is stupid. And what's more, it's a fiction to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, you say peer review, and it's like saying, the data are king, right? I mean, you are up for empiricism, right? You're a real scientist. You think the data are king, right?
I follow the science.
Right. And the point is, follow the science. The data are king. What do the data say? Peer review. All of these things are Trojan horses of one kind or another. And the basic point is, look, review by peers is fucking fantastic. If there are, in fact, any peers, which there aren't always, right? If something is sufficiently ahead of its time, you won't really have peers, and you will have whoever is closest, but their say doesn't tell you whether it's any good or not. The point is, peer review is a phony label for a system in which work is stolen or killed off behind the scenes where nobody can prove it happened. Right? And the point is, hey, I want my work reviewed by peers when there are peers, but I want it done in public, where if they behave badly or they get it wrong, it costs them, right? I don't want some anonymous system where people who are my direct competitors have the right to review my work and tell an editor whether it deserves to see the light of day. And then if I turn out to be right and my reviewers turn out to be wrong, it leaves no hallmark in the universe where I get to come back and say, by the way, the editors and the reviewers on this paper turned out to be wrong, because the point is it never made it anywhere. Now, It is true that some of this problem is addressed by preprint servers, but even preprint servers have requirements. And the answer is, look, we have enough examples of people who don't have the relevant credentials, who have absolutely clobbered the confusions of a field and moved a field way ahead of where it was. We have enough of these examples that the fact is, I don't care that you're, a housekeeper in Bangladesh. If you have an idea and it adds predictive power or reduces the number of things that we have to assume, welcome. You're at the top of the field, right? And so why would we, the whole thing was predicated on the fact that paper and ink were expensive, and therefore there was a limit to the number of things that could be published, and therefore you had to figure out which things were worthy and which things weren't. And the fact is, pixels aren't this way. We can afford to publish it all.
I agree with you to a point. That's not the only reason. That is not the only value of editors. And peer review and editors are different. But the limiting agent was paper and ink, and it is not anymore, but it is still attention. Right. And so having a source that you trust, that you use to say, you know what? Okay, just making up numbers here. 8,000 papers came out last week, and I know that this journal is the one that is most likely to have the things in it that I am going to, and so I go to that journal. That's just a basic level thing that pretty much all academics do. Like, okay, I'm going to start with that journal and this one, and relatively few, I think, would be like, oh, I'm having this thought in an area that I've never thought about before. I'm just going to throw that into a search engine and a research search engine and see what pops out and try to assess what's going on from, how is it that you sort the wheat and chaff? It's something that I enjoy doing and that you enjoy doing, but most academics do not like to play around. It takes a lot more time.
Yeah, but
in the mess that isn't something they're already familiar with.
Yeah, but the disease is so much less severe than the cure here, right? And the number of bits of toxicity that flow from a system in which, yes, well, okay, we need the editors to curate which things are worth your attention. And by the way, which things you will be allowed to pay attention to has everything to do with how well resourced your university is. So if the editors of this journal decide that this paper is worthy of attention, but your university can't afford to buy you access to it, then the point is you don't get to have that attention. And that means that you're going to pay a cost because you're going to be that much more hobbled when you go to write your paper where you try to advance the field. I'm not putting up with this anymore. The fact is, we are talking to an audience on a platform built around cat videos. Right? And the point is, people can figure out whether or not they think we're worth paying attention to. And it may not be that they have to go through every channel in order to figure out who's worth paying attention to. There is some natural way in which people who pay attention to a channel and find themselves enhanced in the world because they actually see stuff coming begin to talk about the fact that, hey, you know, this weird channel with the wood paneling in the background, right? If you listen to them, it actually turns out you see stuff coming down the pike, right?
True.
So
but we also have cats.
We also have, well, that's true. You can't get on YouTube if you don't. But the fact is, all right, now everyone's distracted. But the fact is, this system, I agree that there is a curation problem. Mm-hmm. I do not agree that anything about the system falsely called peer review is the solution to that problem in any regard. I'm all for good editors. In fact, the more I encounter good editors, which is now a reasonably rare phenomenon, the more I appreciate them. But I want the good editors
but you've had a few good editors in this last year.
Yes.
Good editor is an amazing thing.
Good editor is an amazing thing. The ability not to, you know, have the job of both writer and editor where you're trying to wrestle every sentence into clarity where you can, you know, figure out what somebody who didn't write the things reads when they read it. And anyway, it's a very good thing. But no, I think that the system called peer review is supposed to lure you into the false sense of security that it's actually about review by peers, when in fact it's really, you know, the joke, of course, inside of academia is that it's peer preview, right? That it gives your competitors a look at what's coming down the pike. And if your competitors are happy with you, right, they may let it through and they can then, you know, they basically have insider information on what the field is about to find out.
But it only really works for brick in the wall type science. So that, you know, what I refer to as science that is predicated on the foundation of the field being sound and accurate and exactly, you know, predictive of a building that you would want to live in when it was done, and we're going to put one more brick in that wall, and is going to be according to plan. And yes, it's new, but it fits with the overall thing. And the kind of science that asks whether or not the foundation you're building on top of is in fact sound is far less likely to get through peer review because the peers are building within the foundation that you're putting at risk.
Yeah, and I would just also point out that we have two extremely good examples in our field of people who moved the needle very substantially and, you know, would be scoffed at by those who are obsessed with impact factors and peer review, right? You got Darwin and you got Dawkins, right? Dawkins, I believe, I would have to go back and look, but I think he's got like 2 papers from back when he was Tim Bergen's student, interestingly enough. But anyway, he's got like a couple of papers on bird behavior. And then what he's got is a stack of books which don't go through the system that we call peer review. And the fact is there are some really important ideas in there, things that change the way we view evolution, you know, even human evolution. And the point is, well, they weren't reviewed by peers. Well, yes, they were. Yeah. We reviewed it out in public. We read them. We talked about them. We challenged them.
We assigned them to our students.
We assigned them to our students. And the fact is, it's done in a way that is far more honest. And, you know, what is his impact factor, right?
Who cares?
Who cares is the answer. So anyway, yes. The more one experiences I suppose if peer review is working for you, if you're one of the ones who's getting ahead in the field because you've got insider info, I can imagine you liking it very much.
Right.
I would like to think were I in that position, I would still detest it. But nonetheless, it's detestable, and we ought to get over the idea that it is some important thing that is essential to science, because it ain't.
Good. Next question. Lots of discussion on the importance of early treatment for COVID lately. We live in Canada, where we can't get most of what is recommended. Any suggestions? Many thanks. What would we do without you? You're punk rock.
Hell
He says
yeah.
all in caps.
Punk rock.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, the easy part is first.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff that they're going to have impossible time preventing you from getting.
And so treatment and prophylaxis are different, but there are a lot of things, I believe, still in the treatment protocols that are definitely in the prophylaxis protocols. D, C, zinc, and then some ionophore. Quercetin is widely available. Hydroxychloroquine is also apparently ionophore. Like this is largely, it's working by basically opening up the cells to zinc, and that's increasingly not available, even though it always was. But quercetin does at least some of that job. I think, what is it? N-acetyl something, NAC.
Yeah.
Has been disappearing from shelves as well.
It certainly disappeared off Amazon.
But may be still available. But those first four that I mentioned, though, D, C, zinc, and quercetin, are still available, widely available, as far as I know. And at the moment, we and our children are taking those as a kind of just background prophylaxis against illness.
Yep.
And also they are understood to be effective against COVID. So those four.
So hold on.
Yeah.
With respect to D, you need to pay attention to the fact, especially up in Canada, you are super likely to be deficient. And the schema that you need to keep in mind is that were you a normal, healthy hunter-gatherer in the past, you would be exposed to the sun, vitamin D would be produced, it would be absorbed into fat, and as times got lean, because it was the off-season, that fat in being burned would release the vitamin D, and so you would have this, beautifully elegant system for regulating your vitamin D levels. Because you're working at a deficit, almost certainly to begin with, you need to overwhelm that system. There's a lot of good work on how much you need to overwhelm it. But in other words, there's a dose that gets you to compensate for the deficit that you're working at, and then there's a maintenance dose.
Well, I think, if memory serves, I think it is suggested that, basically it's maybe impossible, but at least very, 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 very difficult to hurt yourself with vitamin D. Even cases in which people were routinely being given like 350 times, I think, the RDA consistently for like 2 years, finally started showing up with some damage, which was immediately reversed upon just losing that. It was just an error in manufacturer out of a dairy in New England, I think this was. This is a story that Linda Benskin reports in her amazing review.
It was a dairy error.
It was a terrier. It was indeed. But with regard to, thanks, man. What was I going to say about derriere? Now I got cow butts.
You were talking about how difficult it is to overdose yourself.
Yeah, that's not helping. So you were going to say other things about other supplements.
Yes, I was going to say that things to keep in mind. Things like D. Zinc.
Sorry, you were talking about something that sounded like a bolus dose, a big initial dose, and I think what Dr. Benskin and others have described is that that's actually really not recommended. That relatively high daily doses until and unless your D levels are where they should be, and we're not going to make any claims about what we think those should be, but there's numbers printed in, for instance, Benskin's article, is a far better route to actually getting your levels up than a giant dose and then sort of not taking any more for a week.
No. It's a giant dose and then a normal dose. But anyway,
neither is going to be harmful. I don't think that is the recommended approach.
Fair enough. Nonetheless, you're dealing with a deficit that comes from northern latitude, indoor living, things like this. And you can't take care of it in the winter with the sun. The sun literally never gets high enough in the sky for you to make vitamin D. So you're definitely doing it through a supplement, which requires vigilance.
Or cod.
Vigilance or cod, sure.
No, supplement or cod. You're
Right.
getting
Oh
your
yeah.
vitamin D
No.
with
Okay.
supplement
This is
or
where.
not vigilance. or
Yeah.
God.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. In my first language, that actually would have made more sense, but not in English.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you can do a lot with things that they're going to have a very hard time making scarce. As
Yeah.
soon as the sun gets high in the sky again, you can make vitamin D the normal way. And I think actually this should be altering our behavior.
Yeah.
But that does a tremendous amount with respect to the things that have become lightning rods, with respect to ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. These things have been dried up, and even the sources that were difficult to get to, but you could get to them, have become difficult even here in the U.S. and in Canada. It may be all but impossible, but I wouldn't give up hope. I think
I heard earlier that it was difficult for us, that people were in Canada were having a hard time sourcing IBM at least.
Right. And the thing is, A, that's criminal. B, it's not necessary for you to face COVID and not be seriously jeopardized by it. In fact, vitamin D, it appears, is highly protective.
Yeah.
So anyway, none of this is medical advice, of course, but don't give up hope, because a lot of the sense that you are left with only their one remedy is fiction that they have created. The number of tools in the arsenal is many.
Yeah. Next question. You both were extra cautious in the beginning of the pandemic, but you don't seem to apply the same level of precautionary principle to the Omicron variant. Why is that? Omicron seems highly transmissible and not very virulent.
I don't think I'm going to remain cautious on this until we've seen more what it does, because it is possible that that is an artifact. I think it's highly unlikely that it's an artifact.
What is an artifact?
The mild disease.
Artifact of
small sample size that is non-random, right?
Okay. Yep.
Anyway, if I had to guess today, I would bet strongly in the direction of, this is highly transmissible and it creates mild disease, and is in fact something like, and you need to be careful with this, but as many people have now hinted, and as we hinted early on when I said that this might actually save us from our insane public health response, by virtue of the fact that people would get mild disease and walk away with lifelong immunity, or at least very long-lived immunity, and that would end the pandemic. Effectively, the point is, this could function like a contagious vaccine. Mm-hmm. Now, some have wondered, I've seen this speculation online, could somebody have created it? Could there be a white hat genome hacking entity out there that has released a effectively contagious vaccine, blah, blah, blah. And I will say, if you follow on from the conversation we had, the genome of this thing is very hard to explain.
Yep.
Now, I can't say that there isn't some perfectly natural explanation for the oddity of the phylogenetic position of this virus and the very high level of mutation that it has apparently undergone. So one part of it seems to suggest that it was frozen in time, and another part seems to suggest that it has been accelerated in its rate of change. Yep. So could that be the result of somebody tinkering? It sure could. Now, I wonder if somebody did that, right? As a thought experiment, it's very interesting. Mm-hmm. It's hard. The danger of such a thing, even if this was a white hat attempt to save planet Earth from insane public health policy, it's pretty scary, because the problem is a contagious vaccine is a vaccine that will evolve, right? Mm-hmm. And so maybe it remains benign and continues to spread and saves the world.
So just to be clear, you are hypothesizing that Omicron could have been produced, and if it were produced, could have been produced as a form of quote unquote contagious vaccine. So when you say contagious vaccine, that phrase that you're using is hypothetically what Omicron could be acting as.
Right. Well, and somebody, so I don't want to say I'm hypothesizing because that implies that I believe this to be likely. I would just say formally, I know it shouldn't, but people will hear it that way.
Yeah.
I'm saying one hypothesis, no matter how unlikely or likely, one hypothesis is that somebody released this for a purpose, and given its dimension, given what it seems to do, which is spread really effectively and not cause very serious disease and be capable of creating immunity,
right.
It's possible that somebody released it.
Doesn't that sound like exactly what we needed?
Right.
At some level?
Right. Assuming it is what we think, it could be exactly what we needed.
And and consider, I've been, it hasn't been a full-time mission at all, but I've been looking for reports, hysterical, perhaps exaggerated reports, or anything really in the mainstream media about all the deaths, or frankly, any deaths attributable to Omicron. And I've seen like a handful at most.
Right. And
so there's a whole lot of fear mongering. But so again, long COVID, we don't know, although the less symptomatic the case, the less likely for long COVID probably. And so, into an environment in which clearly a lot of people want us to be very, very terrified of this new variant. And a lot of us, bought it, whatever that might mean. With Delta, Omicron just seems like, why are we supposed to be terrified of something that if this were the first thing, if this were our introduction to COVID, we probably wouldn't even have noticed.
Right.
Right. Like, no, it wouldn't have a name. There would be no public response at all. If you said COVID Omicron to someone, having not been through the last 2 years, have been like, what are you, that's a new, what is that? Right. No, you would not even notice it. And so we are certainly not trying to hold it to a different standard. It seems to be a very different thing with regard to the parameters that matter.
Right. And if it is what we think it is, then, what was true with Delta, which is that probably the best thing that could happen is a really well-managed case of Delta, right? Mm-hmm. Which then gives you permanent immunity. Now, it's possible. The one thing I've heard about Omicron that gives me pause so far is that there is some evidence, and I don't know that it's any good at all, could be, that people who had immunity from prior variants are not necessarily immune to Omicron. But that doesn't strike me as bad news if the evidence that it creates mild disease in healthy people turns out to be robust, because then even a breakthrough case that then gives you durable immunity.
Well, if the reverse isn't true, right? Like if having Omicron gives you durable immunity to it and to the things that came before it, and to some degree minor changes to it,
right.
It won't provide lasting durable immunity to all possible future changes.
Right.
Evolution doesn't work that way. But so long as it's not like, I don't know if we're calling the first one alpha, but like original variants plus Delta, having had it, don't give you protection against Omicron. Okay, but does having Omicron provide immunity against originals and Delta? I don't know.
Yeah,
actually,
I don't either. I don't think it's known. I haven't seen it either.
Yeah.
So I just want to fill in one last piece of the analysis. People need to understand what a attenuated virus vaccine is, right? An attenuated virus vaccine is something that we create in which we take a virus that is dangerous, we attenuate its disease-causing capacity, but we leave it alive so that it can be injected into you, and it can cause essentially a mild infection with this neutered virus, and that causes immunity. And this is some of the best immunity that we can give through vaccines. This is one of the better technologies, but it has one scary phenomenon, which is because it is actually a live virus, it could evolve and do something you don't expect. Now, these things are not contagious, right? When they are delivered as a technological vaccine, the point is it's infectious, but it's not contagious. And with Omicron, you have the danger that this is a contagious thing, and it could therefore do something weird. And so it's hard for me to imagine even a white hat hacking operation actually green lighting such a thing, because the danger is so great. Even if the thing that they created is not dangerous, the danger that it will turn into something is substantial. But the point is, what Omicron seems to be is it seems to have the characteristics of an attenuated virus vaccine with an additional parameter, which is that it spreads itself. And So that's the sort of, if we take the
Yep.
political dimension out of it and we just say sort of scientifically, is this good or bad news?
Mhm.
I think that's the question that we're faced with, is it has those characteristics. And you could even imagine if our public health authorities were not raging maniacs, one thing they might do is figure out, well, okay, did nature just hand us the backbone of a vaccine that, like, for example, would not suck? And they could take that thing and they could, for example, alter it so that it was no longer contagious, right? And who knows?
Yes. Yes. Next question. Dr. Peter McCullough stated that one cannot get COVID-19 twice. That is, cannot be reinfected. Can you elaborate and confirm? Thank you both very much.
Can't confirm it. Can say the question is this, and I know because I asked Peter myself. The kind of immunity generated by infection, that is to say, natural immunity, is extremely broad and apparently very long-lived. And so the game that we are playing with these current vaccines is a very different thing, and the proxy that we're using for how immune you are, which is whether you have an antibody response, is a terrible proxy, right? Because your antibodies actually ought to die away, and ideally what we want is T-cell based immunity, right, which does not produce antibodies. But anyway, so the question is this. You have a small number of cases in which people who have natural immunity appear to get COVID. Are those because their original case of COVID wasn't really COVID? Did they get a false positive with their original case? They've actually never had COVID, and then they get COVID the first time, and we say it's a reinfection? Is the second case of COVID a false positive? Is it a mixture of those? And if you got rid of all of the false positive indications on either first or second infection, would there be anybody left over who had a healthy immune system and had had 2 cases of COVID prior to Omicron? That's the question. Peter says no. He says there's no evidence for a case that does not look like a false positive of one sort or another in which somebody was reinfected, which would be a great thing to be able to say. I don't think it's important. Even if there are rare cases of reinfection, they are rare cases. That much is very clear.
It would be lovely if it were clean.
Oh, it'd be great.
I think it could become important, at least as a political tool, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. If it were true and demonstrably so, that you really could not get reinfected, including, for instance, Omicron having had the original variant. That would be huge. Especially since there's a whole lot of people garbage arguing about like natural immunity not even being useful at all, which is, I mean, they're just making no sense at all. They're not responding to any of the abundant evidence out there. And so the cleaner, the clearer, the more absolute the actual evidence is, the better. But I don't expect, biology being a complex system, I don't expect us to get something quite so clean. And especially given what you suggested about Omicron maybe being able to evade natural immunity from previous infections.
I think there's an even better reason that clean would be important, which is, I do occasionally hear somebody say that natural immunity ain't all that, which is obviously a nonsense argument that doesn't stand up to evidence. But what does get said, which I find totally diabolical, is that what you really want is super immunity. And so if you've had COVID, you still need to get the vaccine. Wow, isn't that amazing? No matter what the case is, you still need the vaccine. No matter how safe you are by virtue of being young and healthy, no matter how immune you are by virtue of having had COVID, you still need the vaccine, because that's the important thing, is the vaccine.
No matter how much emerging evidence on original antigenic sin there might be out there, none of it.
Nothing. You just simply, that no matter what the evidence does, the conclusion of certain people will always be the same. And so the point is, if there really were no cases, none at all, rather than just vanishingly rare, then you could say, yeah, superimmunity is not a thing. If you've had COVID, you're done.
It just makes it easier. But it's like the kids and how at risk they are, and whether or not they need the vaccines. Yes, there are some children who have died, and any child's death, I think, is a tragedy, actually. But it's so vanishingly small that the idea that we should be treating 5-year-olds the same way we treat 80-year-olds with regard to fear of this disease and treatment is patently insane.
The kids are all right, but we're going to vaccinate them anyway.
Yeah, but we're going to fix that.
Yeah.
I think so. This is written a little bit telegraphically, to use my advisor Kluge's.
Could you report it telegenically?
I think these two initial sets of. I think what is said here, if you would put on your glasses, you could back me up here.
I need my binoculars at this distance, but
is Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. Is that how you? Okay. Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson mentioned this during coffee shop talk. If biological sex were not real, what would be the justification for transition surgeries? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now this particular set of arguments, the trans rights activists, it's just so filled with inconsistencies and hypocrisies. It's ridiculous. I'm actually working on final draft. Hopefully, I promise I'm getting it to you. If you're watching, editor, a piece on issues of trans and non-binary and whether or not sex is real and gender is real and how mutable they are in mammals and all of this. And yeah, if biological sex weren't real, then trans wouldn't be a thing, because what exactly would you be transitioning between? It doesn't make any sense. It's incoherent, as so much in that space is.
Well, the joke is on us completely, really.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Antifa and other flavors of anarchists, right? They make arguments. And if you actually listen to the arguments, right, they're not supportive of the thing you think they're supportive of. They're supportive of destruction, right?
Yeah.
And, we saw this after the election, right? After the election, right? All of the people who turned a blind eye and let these people get away with the crazy crap they went through were like, wait, what's that sign that says you're ungovernable, and why are you breaking the windows of the Democratic, headquarters in Portland?
What do you mean you hate Biden? Oh my God, what?
Right. And the answer is they told you this. You just didn't listen.
Yeah.
Right? They in fact
they were anti-Trump, they were anti-everything.
Yes, they are proud of this position.
Yeah.
Listen to them and believe all Antifa when they tell you we're not governable and we intend to burn down your courthouse. Right?
Yes.
But the point is, the postmoderns are the same frickin' way, right?
Yeah,
they are not right that there's no truth and that it's all about power, but they are right that they are all about power and that they are going to treat the truth as a non-entity, and they're going to use whatever arguments make them happy in that minute.
That's exactly right. And this, this, as I've said to you, working on this essay, like, okay, this needs to be a book. It's far too much for an essay, but I understand trans and also mostly separately disorders of sexual development to be very real and very rare, and somewhat more common in some cultures, often due to some actually understood biological phenomenon such as a genetic anomaly, and sometimes not understood as to why they are more common in some places. However, the trans rights activists and the rules now that allow you just declare yourself the opposite sex, and this tends to go in one direction and not the other. You're a man and you declare yourself a woman, and now you go to the top of women's sports, or you get into a women's prison, or you go into a rape crisis center, and you don't even have to do anything but call me Carla. And it is that a stereotype? Yes. Does it happen? Yes. Are women suffering? Yes. It's bad news. And in the case of the trans rights activists, which again I'm separating from the actually true trans people and actually true intersex people, it is about power. It's about power. They are coming for the rights of women and children and homosexuals, all so hard won over many, many years. And a large part of society is saying, yeah, sure, go for it, because this must be the next civil rights battle, because you said it was. Since when do we believe the people who are coming in and abusing people and making claims about what it is that they're doing?
I embrace all of that, but I missed why I'm supposed to call you Carla.
Not me.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I was the dude who wants to start competing against.
Oh, got it.
Go
all
into
right.
the prison.
That makes a lot
women.
more sense.
Yeah, no, don't call me Carla.
All right.
I don't know where that came from. I don't. Have I ever? Yeah, we knew a Carla in
We
high
did,
school.
yeah.
Yeah. That's maybe the only one. Okay. we already did this one. What are your thoughts regarding the origin and evolution of the Omicron variant? You at least talked about one possibility.
Let's put it this way. This is
actually, let me just say, if you get Omicron, will Omicron antibodies protect against original COVID and Delta, or just Omicron and subsequent VOCs?
Variants of concern.
Or backwards compatibility. So we also talked about that.
Dunno. It may or may not matter. And this actually, we might want to have Jay Cooey straighten us out on this. But there's something confusing about the way viruses function, in the sense that you have a swarm of variants. And so the point is, if Omicron, by virtue of its transmissibility, essentially drives the other variants to extinction, which is what we have seen with things like Delta, then the point is, even if it didn't provide immunity to Delta, if Delta went extinct because somehow, and the swarm thing needs some explaining, it's not straightforward as far as I'm concerned, but if Omicron provides immunity to things descended from Omicron, and the other things, the precursors, go extinct by virtue of the fact that they are competed by Omicron, still works.
Yep.
Okay. The question about the
different mechanisms, same result. Mechanisms being invisible to the human being or the population experiencing it for the most part.
I'd be much happier if the answer was it just simply gives you immunity to everything.
Yeah.
But even if it didn't, it might be sufficient to control the thing completely.
Sure.
With respect to the weird fact of Omicron, in one sense, having been absent from the world for a period of time, right? It appears to be derived from a strain that disappeared from the world and then got jump-started as if it was in a freezer.
That is to say, as you said when we talked about this a few weeks ago, its closest known relative is last known from many, many months ago, and there are so many changes. Normally, we would have other intermediate forms, basically. And given that this is such a well-tracked virus, where are all the intermediate forms, or was it in fact banked? And here we go.
Right. And we have two other examples. We have the 77 flu, which ultimately was proven to have been a lab escapee by virtue of the fact that it had been absent from the world since, was it 1950 or something like that? And then SARS-CoV-2 itself has this, it's not the exact same story, but what it is it arrives perfectly adapted to infect human beings without a history of learning that trick. So anyway, we have that sort of fact in the genome here, and we also have a very high number of variants, right? Mutations within the genome, right? So that tells...
You're talking about mutations within the Omicron variant?
Yes. Okay. The Omicron Omicron variant has many mutations and appears to have been in stasis, and those two things point in opposite directions, right?
Right.
So anyway,
yes.
The question is, does that inherently point to somebody technologically tinkering? No. But what you need is some sort of explanation about how nature could do that, right? And so I just want to point to an analogy. There's an interesting fact. If you think about every phylogeny you've ever seen, every tree of life diagram that you've seen, right? They almost always bifurcate, right? You don't have a bunch of branches coming from the same point unless your data isn't any good, unless the data doesn't tell you how to organize it, right? Because basically a species tends to divide into two species, and then one of those species can divide into two species. And so you get this bifurcation pattern.
The chance of a thing simultaneously splitting three ways, or really, splitting into two new forms in addition to retaining its old form, are so staggeringly low that you don't see what are called polytomies, when you have 3 or 4 or 5 or more branches coming off a single node, unless in general it is reflecting a failure of our understanding of what actually happened. Like that is when you see a polytomy on a tree with 3 or more bifurcation points, branches from a single node, that is an indication that we don't exactly know what's going on.
Right. It's an indication that we don't have enough data, rather than an indication of biology having split something into 3 rather than 2.
Right.
However,
yes,
that is not an absolute rule. There are cases in which polytomies are created by biological phenomena. For example, there's a famous case in cichlid fishes in Africa, in, what is it?
the Rift Lakes.
Lake Victoria.
It's all in all three of them. They all have got different characterizations. I
But
don't
in
know
any
what
case,
story you're going to tell yet.
my understanding is this, and even if this
Yeah.
understanding isn't exactly right, it's a proof of concept of how you could get something where you would get many branches coming from the same point from a biological fact, not a data fact, right?
Mhm.
And the case that, as I understand it, what happens is these lakes fluctuate in depth.
Water level. Yep.
And so you've got some population of ancestral cichlids, and the thing drops below some level, and what was a lake turns into 50 lakes.
Yeah.
And the point is,
So not only do they fluctuate in depth, but the floor of the lake is highly varied.
Right.
It's not just a basin.
Right.
Or at least two of the rift lakes are highly varied. And so when the water level drops, you end up with a bunch of different lakes as opposed to just one smaller lake.
Right. The funny thing is you get the opposite phenomenon from sea level change in places like Indonesia, where things that look like islands aren't always islands. So anyway, these kinds of phenomena, the lakes in particular, as the lakes dry up and take a population that was exchanging genes and separate it into 50 populations that temporarily, but for a long period of time, aren't, then the point is you get what we call allopatric speciation. That is to say, speciation in separated populations, and then the water level rises. There's still different species, and then scientists come along and they say, why are all these different species in one lake? And the point is,
there's an actual ecological force that is a moment in time causing something that's more than a bifurcation.
Right. And so my point is, I remember coming upon that as an explanation for polytomy and thinking, oh, okay, so you can get an exotic situation where a polytomy is not an artifact of your data set. It's actually telling you something about biology, but you need a story and what actually took place that caused this that isn't like the normal story of speciation. And in the case of Omicron, there could be some really cool natural story out there that explains this crazy, was it stuck in a freezer, was it on fast forward kind of genome, right? And it could be awesome. I would love to know that story. Wouldn't it be? I mean, it would have to be marvelous.
Coming up with nothing. Like,
right.
What could it be? But yeah, it'd be amazing.
But let's put it this way. If it's a natural story, it's going to be a great one, right? If it's not a natural story, it's going to be fascinating. Who put this together and why?
Yeah.
And did they mean to release it? But anyway, I'm all ears on this one.
Yeah.
So like that.
Awesome. It just reordered itself. COVID comorbidities like HBP. Is that going to be high blood pressure, I think? Hypertension? Does it appear to matter if it is being successfully treated or if it remains untreated? Asking for a friend.
Wait. Does it?
Does it appear to matter if it is being successfully treated or if it remains untreated? Well, boy, I think specifically with regard to hypertension, I am not a doctor and have not thought about this explicitly in a while. But a fairly long time ago, near the end of my father's life, I was thinking a lot about hypertension as he was routinely being told that his high blood pressure was a big source of some of his problems, and he had a lot of other issues as well. And my sense then was that the medical establishment did not fully understand blood pressure, was again using a single simple metric to diagnose and describe where you should be and where you shouldn't be, and that it was not actually clear to me at all that in many of the cases where it was being identified as a problem, that it was. I also had this experience during my pregnancies, which is a story for another time, where I got dosed with preeclampsia, which is diagnosed.
You got diagnosed, yeah.
Did I say diagnosed?
You said dosed, which would be weird.
Yeah, how would you even do that? Diagnosed with preeclampsia, which is a very, very serious condition when it's real. And my sense in both of the ends of my pregnancies was, no, I actually think that being told to lie down and shut up and not move for the last 6 weeks of my pregnancy is going to be worse for me, and I'm not going to comply. And I didn't, and I was fine, and so are our children. So, the sort of overdiagnosis, the looking for simple metrics is, this is not a drumbeat that we are new to with COVID. The idea that no, actually too much of what is passing for good healthcare is in fact very, very bad healthcare. So I have I have a suspicion that hypertension is much more complicated than it seems. It does show up, as you saw earlier today, on some of these lists of comorbidities. So I think there is something real there. I think there's a real signal there, but I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add except that one has the sense that this is a complex factor and that there may be some component of that factor that matters a great deal, but that the category itself is not all that helpful.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a useful response.
Yeah, and
I would say proceed with caution.
Yeah, I mean, if we take something else, like one of the other comorbidities, I mean, obesity is the obvious one. We've already talked about it. What would it mean for it to be successfully treated, or if it remains untreated? I think you would prefer to be lighter. If you are morbidly obese, it's not good for you. You can be far healthier than you might be at the same weight, and far less healthy, but it will also improve your health if you lose weight. For many of the other comorbidities I'm thinking of, what does treatment mean? If the treatment for kidney disease or diabetes, is medicinal, is drugs that are then going to cause side effects for which you're going to need other drugs, which are going to cause side effects, et cetera, et cetera. Or there is either understood by your doctor or not, but understood by some hopefully savvy, long-standing tradition of treatment that involves you taking some responsibility into your own hands and behaving differently, either through your activity or your food or your exposures. By all means, do that. By all means, do that, no matter what. Assume reindeer could fly and had glowing noses.
Mm-hmm.
What evolutionary path and mechanisms get them there? Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you both.
Okay, I got this one. What happens?
Great. You're going to take the Christmas question. Great.
It's all you.
No.
The obvious answer here is that we create a simulation in which that doesn't violate the rules, and therefore our evolutionary history, our staving off our own extinction long enough to generate simulators in which flying reindeer makes some sense, is really the only path.
That's a terrible answer.
It is.
That's a terrible answer. Okay.
Terrible. Well, you got a better one?
Yeah. Well, there's actually 4 questions here, right?
Okay.
Flying reindeer, red-nosed reindeer, evolutionary path. I'm going to read that as selective forces and mechanisms. Okay, for each. So flying, selection for mechanisms by which they get there, and red noses, selection for mechanisms by which they get there.
Rhymes with
red noses,
hying.
selection for.
Yes.
That is by which we get there. It's in the song. We already know the selective advantage of Rudolph's red nose.
It wasn't rhinitis?
So that may be the mechanism. That may be the mechanism, but the selective force,
yes,
he was able to light them, having So in this rubric, flying had to come first in the order of character evolution. Flying had to come first. If they're just I guess if they're on the ground, still the red nose could help shine the way.
But you know the problem as well as I do.
Do I?
Yeah. The problem is the reindeer has 4 limbs. And if you repurpose any of those limbs for flying, then
we're talking about the red nose, dude. Stay on topic.
But you said the flying had to come first.
Yes, but I was saying that had to come first. But once you're on the red nose, just stay on topic for the moment. Then we'll talk about, the angel's wings and all of that.
Okay,
which is where we're going.
The rhinitis is favored, becomes a symbiont.
You've assumed the mechanism is rhinitis.
No, you said that's the mechanism, but it's not the selective force.
I said that could be the mechanism. I was actually going to say I'm not sure what the mechanism is.
Okay, so let's say it's rhinitis.
Photophores in the nose. I don't know. Because rhinitis only makes you it doesn't make you glow, does it? Well, only some say it glows.
Frankly, I'm not even sure this story is metaphorically true.
You're terrible to live with sometimes.
I know.
It's just terrible. No appreciation for Christmas carols whatsoever.
Well, I mean,
okay, it's not even a carol, a song,
no,
a story.
It's a song.
And one of the couple of best animated Christmas specials, right?
Which one?
The Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer one.
No. Yeah, I guess.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I liked the one with the great pumpkin.
Like I said,
Terrible to live with. I know.
That was Charlie Brown, I think.
Yes, and not Christmas, I think.
Well, yes, that too. But okay. The red nose gets him back in the in-group and helps the group navigate through blizzardy darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the selective pressure that encourages red noses. Why there's only one, I don't know. But I think we're just basically getting a snapshot of the reindeer landscape, and you would expect it to spread. It seems like a valuable selective pressure.
Also, after the triumph of the red-nosed reindeer, you have the selective advantage, the sexual selective advantage of having a red nose and being fawned after, literally, by the girl reindeer.
Yeah. And now, it seems to me that some of the names of Santa's other reindeer are somewhat gender neutral, but I think they're kind of all boys, aren't they?
Oh, wait, no,
idea. Vixen. Isn't Vixen one?
Yes, I think so.
That sounds like a girl name.
That really does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how much farther we can go with that.
We could delicately ask the question of whether Vixen is a boy reindeer, but is in fact trans and has
trans species. I think it's a girl fox.
Oh well, all right. Yep. I think you win that round.
I think I do too. Now we're going to take us down the road of the flying and whether or not it's what the selective forces might be and how plausible in all of this.
Yeah, my point was going to be...
it's homology again, isn't it, with you?
Well, no, it's really your point. I'm just bringing it forward in time. But the problem with the Pegasus is that it has both wings and 4 limbs. And so where did the extra pair of wings, the extra limbs come from?
Well, maybe there's a serial homology issue. So you've got a repetition of, I always forget when I'm not thinking about it actively, if it's the HOX or the homeobox genes. You get a repetition, for instance, in the vertebral column that spurs an additional girdle and an additional set of limbs.
Totally, segmentation.
And instead of being limbs, now it's wings.
This would be a lot better if it was Rudolph the Flying Centipede rather than reindeer.
I mean, yes, Drosophila are the most studied. The fruit flies are the most studied with regard to the serial homology and the repetition in these genes. But we have them too. I mean, our vertebral column has extended, we think, as a result of repetitions in these. Again, I don't remember if it's homeobox or HOX genes, but one being a subcategory of the other. What? Were it possible?
Yes.
What would have been the original selective pressure for wings? In wings while retaining full quadrupedality.
I think it's the pressure of the market to generate a flying, self-illuminating cervid that... I think this question is so far outside my area of expertise that I'm in fact doing nothing other than damaging my credibility trying to engage
I think unfortunately in some circles you're now enhancing it.
Oh, is that right? Odd.
Yes. Okay, so I don't know. This next one you should take a look at. It's just a comment. I don't know if I should read it. You can't. You're pretending to look, but I know you can't see.
Again, I need the binocular glasses.
Yeah. So that one. I should get rid of this one. No, sorry, this one here.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Layman seems a lost cause. Sam Harris recently suggested listening to Dr. McCullough would cause brain damage. Can he be reached? Canada school boards are now pushing for vaccinated 5-year-olds. They've done most of the teens.
I heard something. I didn't. I heard something in Sam's most recent podcast that surprised me a little bit, which was I heard Sam working in the direction of steel manning the other side. And frankly, Sam, if you're listening, I hope you'll take this in the spirit in which it is offered. I thought you did a terrible job of steel manning the other side, but I was greatly heartened to hear you try. And if that means that you are beginning to investigate why it is that people that you once respected have come to a completely different conclusion than you, and you're willing to entertain the possibility that we have not lost our minds, I think you'll find that there is a lot to be discovered and engaged, and I know that we would welcome you back here on what I believe is the side of reason. So anyway, Happy New Year to you.
All right. I think we're at about an hour. Let's do 3 more. Shall we?
Yeah.
As a self-published author, I'm curious to know how you went about choosing a publishing company in an age of censorship and cancel culture. It's an interesting question, and I don't think that we are we don't have the freedom to say all of what happened. But we were thrilled to just as we were actually finishing the proposal, and our wonderful agent Howard Yoon was about to begin shopping it around to the big publishers, and he and we had a lot of conversations about exactly this issue. We were approached by our who turned out to be our excellent editor, Helen, at Penguin, and specifically Helen Healy, and she specifically came, and I have to elide some details here, with the idea of there being an imprint which did not end up manifesting, that was specifically going to be created to deal with the increasing levels of censorship and cancel culture within publishing, both in academia and not. This, of course, not being an academic book. And so the idea was, I don't know if you're thinking of writing a book or what book you might be wanting to write, but given who you are, you might be at risk of having the cancelers come at you, including from within house, whatever publishing house you go with, and I come effectively with an offer of a potential imprint that would specifically protect against that. And so that was intriguing, even though it didn't end up manifesting.
Yes, but still, we were not recanceled.
We're not recanceled for the book. other things.
You never know, but
yeah. Well, the attempts were made. Yes,
attempts were made. Yes.
All right. Vaccines are likened to an airbag in a car. Despite personal risk stratification, the airbag will protect you. Do you agree?
Let's put it this way. The more I learn about shenanigans, the less interested I am to hear what the conclusion of those analyses was, because none of it looks honest. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there is a very interesting piece of work that is now, Twitter is clearly suppressing the hashtag, but the work goes under the hashtag of more harm than good, done by a Canadian outfit that analyzed the Pfizer trials. And there's a PDF version, which might be a little dry. There's also a video version, which runs through the same context that's in the PDF. And I think everybody ought to just simply go through it, right? And the point is, this is the kind of analysis that results in the conclusion that the vaccines are, yes, doing an awful lot of good here and maybe doing too much harm over there, and shouldn't we be risk stratifying? And the question is, what can we actually objectively say about the value of them in either controlling the disease or protecting individual health? And I am not saying they don't, but I am saying my confidence that I can say that they do some good and that we can see it in an age stratified thing. I have lost all confidence that I know the research is so compromised so repeatedly by so many obvious games that I don't believe we know. We don't know enough to make policy around these things other than it's not worth it.
One more comment before the final question. The comment is, lefty says bureaucratic capture. The righty says normal, inevitable, please grow up. I love you too. I think those of us, the evolutionary biologists on the left who see what humans are and have been and can be, will say, we therefore need a system that precludes the gaming of the system. Because yes, people will figure out ways to get what they personally want, even if they started out in a system where they thought that they were working for a higher good.
I agree with that. I will say I am actually working on an essay that talks about this very issue, and it actually comes from an insight I had years ago when Game B was actually people meeting in a room talking about how to make civilization work. And the answer is the right is not incorrect that this is normal for this to happen. And in fact, that's why the evolutionary biologists are saying what they're saying, which is that thing is going to evolve. And the question is, that is not the same thing as saying there is nothing to do about it. But what you do about it has to be evolutionarily aware or it won't work. And so the question is, what is the evolutionarily aware mechanism that frustrates the evolution of capture? And it did not work here, and we need to bootstrap it.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Last question for today. Do groups of human beings sacrifice or exile unwanted members in lean times?
Well, the go-to person on this would be Rene Girard. This is a name you will increasingly hear. There's some quadrant of the library that is the antidote of the quadrant of the library that we are being dragged into, that has, in its fiction part Kafka and Orwell and Heller and all of that, and Huxley, and in its nonfiction part has a searching, amongst Tuskegee and brown shirts and all of these other.
Several of the books that I shared last week.
Yeah. So that quadrant of the library, what we are forced to think about in order to understand our current moment, there's also an antidote quadrant of the library that we ought to be searching, and it contains things like mass formation and Rene Girard's work on scapegoating, which is really what you're getting at here.
Yes, but that's all true. I guess I expected you to go to the Maya and specifically speak to what was your hypothesis and what we wrote into our book about the building, the policy of having public works projects that can expand in times of plenty, and that then can be put on hold without forcing anyone to starve or going after individuals in particular in lean times, basically does an end run around what seems to be, yes, a fairly general truth that in lean times, some people will end up suffering, and it is likely that some group will look around and decide who it is that they're going to go after first, and will go after them.
Beautiful. And I think in some sense what I would say is I hope that our book lodges itself in that part of the library for exactly this reason. Mm-hmm. And that the answer is there are things that one can do. You need to understand what the phenomena are, why they happen. So imagine a library with two wings. Over in the, Kafka, Orwell, Tuskegee, Mengele part of the library, witch hunting belongs solidly in there. And then in this antidote wing of the library, you have Girard, and you have mass formation, and hopefully you have our book and our argument about the Maya and what it is that they imply. And the question is, all right, which side of the library are we going to hang out on? Are we going to keep being dragged over here to problem nightmare space, or are we going to get over here to solution space and figure out how one actually addresses this so that we don't keep revisiting the ugly part?
Yeah, let's be like the Maya. Let's build some pyramids.
Hell yeah. Mm-hmm. And some sock bays.
Sock bays too. Yeah, to get between the pyramids.
Exactly.
And the city-states.
All right. Yeah. I'm in. Yeah. Makes me miss them.
Indeed. Yeah. We have some friends who are in Maya country right now, and I wish we were with them.
Yep.
Yeah. That brings us to the end of Q&A number 109. We've been at this a while.
We have been.
We've been at this for a while, not just in across months and now years, but today. So thank you as always. We are really heartened. It is hard to be heartened these days, but we are heartened by how much we hear from how many of you with regard to, we got some letters this week. We also got some gifts to our P.O. box, some books that are amazing and that we've just begun to dip into, and also some other gifts, including some letters explaining something about people's lives and how they come to how they came to find us, and it means a lot. We really thank you for that very much. So in this end of year, Merry Christmas to everyone and Happy New Year. And I think think we'll be back. We will be back before the new year, but we will not be back on Christmas. And anything else before?
Yeah, I was going to say Happy Hanukkah Afterglow, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and this is going to be an interesting year, but I think it's going to be a decisive one, and let's figure out how to be bold, fight courageously, and get back to being Americans and citizens of the world, and being good to each other.
Indeed. Now and always. Be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everyone.